Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to our 41st president, George Herbert Walker Bush. All right, nickname is Poppy. Basically, that was his mother's father's name was Pop, so Bush was called Little Pop, and or he was called Poppy. So basically, after his mother's father or his maternal grandfather. All right, still with us today, and so is his the First Lady Barbara Bush. All right, Episcopalian, Yale. Long career in business and oil in Texas, very prominent business person, also a very long career in public service. Member of the House for a while, ambassador, director of the CIA, and then vice president for 8 years, and then a one-term president. I'll talk about his election, the campaign versus Clinton in the next video. Okay, his VP was Dan Quayle. Dan Quayle got a lot of criticism because he always misspoke, misspelled things, always never sounded like he knew what he was talking about, even though he was a fairly intelligent man, just never came across that way in his public persona. All right, so notable events. Let's talk about this. 1989, there was a major savings and loan scandal, mostly about banks across the country. A lot of them were corrupt and doing insider trading and the poor deals, and a lot of the banks fell. Not to the extent during the Great Depression, but you had a major bank crisis. All right. 1989, Bush authorizes and supports the invasion of Panama to capture the infamous drug runner General Noriega. All right, so that was sort of a very popular event for some people. People really thought that was great. America was getting involved in that. Not the Panamanians, but we thought it was pretty good. Also, the fall of communism. A lot of this is because of the Reagan years that we talked about. Certainly sort of ending the Cold War and putting pressure on the Soviet Union to make changes. 1989, there's finally elections in Poland, right? Yalta was in 1945. We had promises for free elections back in 45. Now we don't really see them come true to 1989. In 1990, the Berlin Wall fell. Okay. 1990, Hungary, and there's elections in Hungary and Yugoslavia. And finally, 1991, the Soviet Union collapses. Okay. Also, the official kind of end of the Cold Wars in 1990 when there's a joint meeting between NATO, right, the North American Treaty Organization, and the Warsaw Pact of the communist countries. They meet and they sign a non-aggression pact that they would never fight each other. So that really is the end of the Cold War, because both of those organizations were created to basically defend against each other. 1990, 1991, you have the Persian Gulf War. Again, Saddam Hussein in Iraq invades Kuwait. Many people felt threatened by that action. The Kuwaitis asked for assistance. Bush does a wonderful job of working the telephones to gain a strong international coalition to go into Kuwait and remove the Iraqis, and we also invade Iraq. This was a UN resolution, not a declaration of war, obviously, and the UN resolution gave the U.S. and the Allied powers the authority to pursue the Iraqis until they got to Baghdad. We cannot enter Baghdad. Now, that'll become important in the Second Persian Gulf War, but for this point, we cannot enter Baghdad. Okay? So that was a very successful end. Huge show of American air power in the desert, basically just running over Saddam Hussein's forces. Very popular war in the sense, very few casualties, and a very, quick outcome in our favor. Also, 1990, another important law was passed, the American with Disabilities Act. This basically guaranteed people who were disabled, like in wheelchairs, equal access to public buildings. Basically, there was a lawsuit. There was a gentleman who was forced to be carried into a courthouse by the police because he couldn't walk in, because he was confined to a wheelchair, and there was no ramp to get into the courthouse building. So this man was so humiliated that he actually had to be carried in as an adult into this court proceeding. He sues, and basically creates legislation that now you see it in our own schools. In public buildings, there are always ramps and elevators for those who are disabled. There was also another Clean Air Act in 1990 to make further reductions in emissions by factories. Okay, miscellaneous fun facts. Again, about 6'2", 195, had a really uneven grin. Very sparse use of syntax in his speeches, spoke in choppy, short phrases. And he was often criticized for this as not being eloquent, like Reagan was. I mean, Reagan was this great, gifted speaker. Bush, on the other hand, was not, never could quite fill those shoes and was criticized for it. Very gentle personality, but tough. He used the telephone to develop personal relationships with world leaders. And that was his telephone diplomacy during the Iraq War. Liked to jog, play tennis, golf. Kind of a funny story. He hated broccoli, and his mother made him eat it. And he said once he was president, he banned it from the Air Force One menu and all White House menus. And people sort of criticized him for this because broccoli is supposed to be good for you. And he once said, quote, "I'm president of the United States, and I'm not going to eat my broccoli anymore." Yeah, so that was kind of the end of it. It's kind of a funny thing. But on a less humorous note, in World War II, he flew 58 combat missions. Very decorated pilot. During one mission in 1944 in the Pacific, his plane was hit by a Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Even though the wings were on fire, he continued to do his run and drop all the bombs on the target. The plane limps back out to sea, and the men all had to bail out. 2 men died. Bush himself slammed into the tail during the bailout. And was injured for months and months and months, but he was given the Distinguished Flying Cross for what he did in that mission. So very decorated World War II veteran. All right, well, thank you for listening and watching, and have a great day.